This tank is a fake along with this one, and today's video is of course looking at two tanks that have got the name heavy tank but aren't necessarily quite what you would expect from a heavy tank, and hopefully you guys will enjoy this one. But of course we are first looking at the T125, and I'll give you a rundown of the vehicle first. So this is the tier 10 American heavy tank. It has a very good gun, and it's basically why it's almost considered a medium tank, followed by the fact that the armor model on this vehicle isn't particularly amazing. It can bounce quite a few rounds, but it does really rely on your opponents not knowing the weak points, of which there are quite a few, mainly the turret weak point, of course, that all American tanks have unless you're the T123, and then it does have the lower plate weak points where they can pen on the left and right hand side, or just through the front of the lower plate as well, and even some of the upper plate is basically pennable from most people firing premium ammunition. So yeah, not particularly heavy armor like you would see from an E100, where if you side scrape it would work. It is of course American. It doesn't get any side armor, and it really has to rely on dishing out the damage like you've been seeing so far in this free play. Now I already know, this isn't the fastest of vehicles in the game, but what it does have is if you do equip a turbocharger, the engine power is actually not awful, so you are able to get up to a top speed quite nicely, and turbo on this thing does make it so much more versatile so that you can do things that a lot of other heavy tanks are just not going to be able to do, like just basically getting into positions in certain points in the game which are just not feasible if you're playing such a slow tank like an E100. Now the T125 is perfect when you can get up close and personal, and although you can see an example of a T125 side scraping here against a mouse, it is not a good idea, because what can happen if you are side scraping is anyone with any length or amount of knowledge within the game will be able to pen your engine deck at the rear, which is basically an auto pen because the armor at the back is absolutely useless, and anything over like 100 mil will probably pen you by overmatch. And of course when they're hitting your engine deck, then you're not going to be able to reliably count on the fact that you're not getting set on fire, which is never a good chance when you're risking it every single time. But of course the key thing is that once you do kind of push forward and you get into a position where you're able to duke it out with tanks and keep it up with a lot of the mediums, you can push into areas like this, and this is really going to be able to take your game to the next level. And hopefully you guys are enjoying the video so far, and if you are, please do consider subscribing, because it is a massive help to me, and of course you will see more videos like this if you're enjoying it, of course. But what we see, of course, pushing in like this is a good opportunity to showcase what the T125 can do from a variety of different angles, and this is one of the best E5 replays, and of course you've got to do that when you're trying to show the pinnacle of what a tank can do. And although this tank is supposedly the heavy, it just feels like you have the gun accuracy of a medium, and you pretty much do when you look at this thing in comparison to a lot of the other heavy tanks. And it doesn't suffer in terms of the amount of alpha too much, because you're still able to compete with the mediums on that regard. You got 400, and that is more than enough to really duke it out with a lot of people. Now things like a VKP, obviously not a problem for the E5. The heat rounds on this thing are really nice, and you're able to have 340 pen, which is basically enough to go through most heavy tanks at the tier, if not all of them, if you aim correctly. And the one thing that is always nice as well is when a YOLOing Scorpion G, thinking that he's going to really punish you in the game, realizes that he can't just auto aim you entirely like some of the other mediums that you would see. But yeah, of course, this heavy really does annoy people, and it is just such a solid contender for playing it really well, and it offers so much flexibility for people that are wanting kind of a hybrid between the heavies and of course the mediums. And of course we should look at the next vehicle now to see how that one really fares, since this game is really drying up. obviously in the eyes of being a medium, you're seeing a very aggressive push in the Object 260, which is the next vehicle that we're looking at. And although this is kind of, I would say, arguably more of a heavy than you would see from the T110E5, at least in terms of the armor, it is a little bit troll. It is kind of like a souped up version of an Object 252U that can go a lot faster than the Object 252U and has a much better gun than the 252U. It is basically the tier 7 kind of souped up version, as we've said. But what makes this tank so special is that with 0.34 accuracy, 440 alpha, meaning you can trade with most of the mediums in the game, and some of the heavy tanks, of course, things like the Rhinoceronte you can do, but what the pinnacle of this tank can do is that it can relocate so quickly, and also when it is relocating you have that kind of troll armor to be able to really get into some nifty positions, much like the E5. Unfortunately for the enemy team, this tank does not get any turret weak points like the E5 does. Well, it does get 2 cupolas, but in order to hit those cupolas, you've somehow got to hit one of these little piddly things that they call a cupola. But of course, that makes it much easier for you to be able to duke it out on a ridgeline. You don't get as much gun depression as the E5 does with its 10 degrees, but you do get 6 degrees, and that is capable of kind of getting you into some positions, not all of them, obviously not the most ideal gun depression, but you can make it work, as you're seeing here. Now obviously when you're coming up against things like a mouse, it's going to be really crucial that you have that accuracy, and with that 0.34 dispersion, this tank genuinely does not feel like you are playing in a heavy tank, because like the E5, it just feels like you can basically punish everyone. If someone is close to you, if you are not trying to snipe from the back of the base like a base camper, then this tank is definitely really nice to have in that up close engagements, not only because it has that kind of annoying armor to a degree, unless of course they catch the hull armor, which like the E5 has the big lower plate that can be penned, and of course it has the pike nose that the IS-3 and all of those tanks do have, so of course you can get penned in that way. But what it does have is that holistic nature. It's fast, it has a little bit of armor, it has good alpha, has decent penetration, and it has 6 degrees of gun depression, making it somewhat flexible. Not the most, but still workable. And that's really what makes the 260 tick, and why it isn't really a traditional heavy. It doesn't have the high alpha, it doesn't really have the annoyingly thick armor that is capable of being able to side scrape, and that's the real thing that I feel like this tank does really well, and why it is capable of tearing through opponents and picking up what, like 5,000 damage in a few minutes of the battle. Yeah, really nice to see, and definitely not capable or possible in something like an E100 for the most part, just because you aren't flexible enough to get so many shots in. And yeah, I really do like seeing this tank in action. So with the game slowing down like it usually does in World of Tanks, what do? Well, of course, you speed up in the 260, and you can see it racing into position against the E5 to get that solid position against the opposite heavium, as I like to call them, the heavy medium, and that's really the way in which you've got to play this thing. You've got to play it aggressively. You don't tend to do too well if you're kind of sitting back and resting on your laurels. You have to be the one that pushes out that damage, gets up close and personal, and tries to do something. And when you do that, you can have results like you're seeing here, and being able to punish a lot of the opponents that come out of nowhere and just come away with hopefully what is the victory, even if there is still 3,500 damage to be had in this game. Now unfortunately, we are going to see the 260 surprise the Waffenträger by getting into this position. He loads a HE round using intuition, finds the Waffenträger, and unfortunately for him, he bounces off the 260 and the 570 HE roll of this tank. Yes, definitely triggers the waffle as you're seeing him stop in the open, doesn't bother to get back into cover, and now it's basically going to be curtains for him if he can't get behind the rock. And unfortunately for him, RNG doesn't go his way and he manages to finish him off, making it a 1 versus 1 against the UDES 1516. Now although this tank is quick and there is a UDES on the enemy team, is it going to be quick enough to find him and finish him before the game ends? There's 11 seconds on the clock, there is no rounds left in this tank, and of course there's no way of being able to ram him, and unfortunately comes away with a loss even having done 11,500 damage. So yeah, the true medium finishes off the fake medium, and hopefully you guys did enjoy. Make sure to like the video and hopefully you join me back in the next one.